Billionaire CEO hid to watch his fiancée treat his sick sister. What the help revealed was shocking. He was supposed to be on a plane to Tokyo. His driver had already pulled out of the gate. His fiancée had kissed his cheek, waved from the doorway of a $20 million estate, and whispered that she would miss him terribly. She had looked perfect doing it. She always did. But Eun Si-woo was not on a plane. He was sitting in a hidden room behind the east wall of his own library, watching 6 security monitors, waiting to find out whether the woman he was about to marry.
What happened? Who did this to you? Am I a burden? No, you're not. It's Suri. I'm here, it's all right.
Was the person he thought she was. He already suspected the answer. He was about to find out he had been more right than he wanted to be. If this story moves something in you, please hit that like button right now and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss a story that will keep you on the edge of your seat from the very first minute. This helps our growing channel. Now, let us begin. The Eun estate sat in the hills above northern Seoul, set back from the road behind iron gates and a long driveway lined with trees that bloomed pink in spring and burned gold in autumn. From the outside, it looked like what it was, the home of one of the most powerful men in South Korea. From the inside, in the weeks leading up to the biggest wedding of the season, it felt like a stage. And like all stages, what happened in the wings was nothing like what happened under the lights. Eun Si-woo was 30 years old. He had silver-white hair inherited from his grandfather, which on a man his age produced an effect that was striking rather than aged. He wore titanium-framed glasses that sat against his face with the precision of something chosen rather than needed. He wore a Brunello Cucinelli suit, the color of wet slate, and he moved through the world with the unhurried certainty of someone who understood that power dressed in a whisper was louder than power that announced itself. He had built the Eun Group from a modest inheritance into a private investment firm worth $3 billion by the time he was 29. He had done it through patience, through watching carefully, and through the absolute refusal to commit to anything he had not first observed from every angle. He had not observed Yoon Suri from every angle. That was his mistake. He was correcting it now. He had known, before he built the hidden room, and before he staged the Tokyo departure, that something was wrong. He had known it the way he knew things in business that had not yet become provable, as a shape in the data, a pattern that did not resolve into a clear conclusion, but would not leave him alone either. He had brought it to Mrs. Kim, the only person in this household he trusted completely with information he had not yet verified. Mrs. Kim had listened to him, describe what he had noticed. Then she had been silent for a long moment. Then she had said, in the careful tone she used when she was about to share something she had been holding for some time, that she had noticed something about Tessa Simone. She said that on 3 separate occasions over the previous 2 weeks, Tessa had come to her after her shift and asked questions. Not complaints, not accusations. Questions. She had asked how the household typically managed communication between Si-woo's schedule and Min-seo's care routine when he was traveling. She had asked whether there was a protocol for who had access to the medical supply room and when. She had asked, very carefully, whether Mrs. Kim had noticed any change in Min-seo's mood in the evenings recently. She had framed every question as professional curiosity. She had not mentioned Suri once. Mrs. Kim had told Si-woo this with the expression she wore when she was presenting evidence. She had been sorting in her own mind for days. She said she thought Tessa was concerned about something she had not yet decided how to name. Si-woo had thought about that for a long time. Then, he had gone to the East Wing and begun. Yoon Suri was 25, the only daughter of the Yoon family whose construction empire had quietly shaped the modern Seoul skyline. She was the kind of beautiful that photographers described as architectural, everything proportioned, everything precise, dark eyes that caught light and held it. She wore a cream-colored Celine blouse and wide ivory trousers when she waved Si-woo off that morning. Her dark hair was loose and perfect, and she stood in the doorway of the estate like a woman who had already decided it belonged to her. Their engagement had been announced 6 weeks ago. A merger between the Yoon Group and Yoon Holdings would be sealed by the wedding. Everyone agreed it was a perfect match on paper. Siwoo had spent 3 months observing Suri in social settings. She had seemed warm, sharp, composed. She had said the right things about his sister. She had touched his arm when he spoke about his parents. He had been, if he was honest with himself, not quite cautious enough. He had let the surface be enough. That ended the morning he came home from a late meeting to find his sister Minseo crying alone in her room at 11 at night. When he asked what was wrong, she said it was nothing and looked at the door with an expression that told him the nothing had come from outside and was standing very close to a truth she was afraid to say out loud. He had not pushed. He had held her hand and stayed until she slept. And the next morning he made his decision. He would disappear for 3 days. He would watch. Minseo was 20 years old and had been ill since she was 16. A chronic autoimmune condition that arrived the way disasters arrive in lives built for other things, quietly at first, just fatigue and aching joints that everyone called growing pains, and then blood work that could not be explained away, and then a diagnosis that rearranged everything. She required daily medication, multiple doses timed precisely. She required rest, heat therapy for her joints, careful movement, supervised by a therapist. She required the kind of constant, knowledgeable attention that could not be faked. The kind that understood which small things were warning signs and which were simply bad days and which required a call to her physician. She was 20 years old and she spent most of her hours in the room her brother had converted for her, with a hospital bed and specialized equipment and walls she had covered with her own drawings, intricate, dreaming, strange and beautiful art made by a girl whose body kept her still but whose imagination ran constantly and would not be managed. She was gorgeous in the way of people who carry tremendous inner life, pale from time spent inside, her dark hair long, her eyes, her father's shape. But when she smiled at something she genuinely found funny, she lit up a room the way certain people do, the ones with more soul than they have space to contain. Siwoo loved her with the specific intensity of someone who raised a sibling while also grieving parents, who had been both brother and protector since he was 22 and she was 12, and their mother had taken his hand in a hospital room and said, "Take care of her. You are the only one who knows how." He had built his entire life around that promise. He had made the Group successful not for ambition alone, but because success meant resources, and resources meant Minseo had the best specialists and the best care, and would never, as long as he was standing, want for anything that money and devotion and persistence could provide. He had missed birthdays for emergency board meetings and attended galas. He found tedious and maintained relationships. He found draining because all of it fed the machine that kept his sister safe and comfortable and cared for. He had never once resented any of it, not once, because the alternative was unthinkable, and the alternative would not be permitted. And now he was sitting in a hidden room watching 6 screens, because 3 nights ago his sister had cried and called it nothing, and he needed to know what nothing looked like when he was not in the house. He did not wait long to find out. 40 minutes after the car pulled out, Suri made a call. The security system's audio picked it up through the sitting room microphone. She was speaking to Han Ji-yeon, her closest friend, 26, who appeared at every Yoon family event and whom Siwoo had always found slightly too interested in other people's financial arrangements. Suri was not using the voice she used around him. The warmth was completely gone. What replaced it was something flatter and more efficient, the voice of a person who has set down a costume and is speaking from inside their actual face. She told Ji-yeon that the sister situation was the one thing she had not fully anticipated. She said, Siwoo's devotion to Minseo was beyond anything she had prepared for. She used the word devotion, the way a person uses a word when they mean a problem. Then Ji-yeon laughed in the satisfied way she laughed when things were going well. She asked what the plan was after the wedding. Suri said the plan was patience. She said that once the merger was legally sealed and the assets were restructured under the joint arrangement, the landscape shifted. She said Siwoo was a devoted man. Devoted men were manageable because their devotion gave you the lever. You did not pull the lever all at once. You applied pressure in the right place at the right time. and you let the structure do the rest. Ji-yeon laughed again in the satisfied way she laughed when things were going well. She asked if the girl would be a problem. Suri said the girl was sick. Sick people were already dependent. You simply shaped what they depended on. She said she had already started. She said, you did not attack something directly when the person protecting it was watching. You removed the reason for the protection. You made the protected person doubt the protection itself. You introduced the right questions in the right ears, and you waited for doubt to do what doubt always did, which was spread. Ji-yeon said Suri had always been good at the long game. Suri said the long game was the only game worth playing. She said that in 6 months, Siwoo would look at his sister and see someone whose dependency on intensive care had made her less capable of independence, not more. And Suri would be the one who had been gently, consistently suggesting a different approach all along. And when the time came to restructure the care arrangements, it would not look like cruelty. It would look like progress. Siwoo sat in the dark room and listened to his fiancée describe his sister as a project to be dismantled. He did not move. He breathed. He watched. Then Suri walked upstairs, and Siwoo felt something cold move through his chest because he knew, from the set of her shoulders, that she was not going to check on her future sister-in-law. She was going because no one was watching. The camera in Minseo's room showed his sister at her desk, drawing. Sketchbook open, headphones on, working with the absorbed quiet of someone who trusted that the world outside her door was safe enough to ignore. She looked exactly like what she was, a 20-year-old girl doing the thing she loved most in the world. The door opened without a knock. Minseo pulled her headphones off. Something in her face shifted the moment she registered who it was, not dramatically, just the small rearrangement of a person who has learned to be careful. Suri stood in the doorway in her cream celine blouse and looked at the room, the way someone looks at a space they find offensive, but are too polished to say so. Her eyes moved across the drawings on the walls, across the medical equipment, across the medication tray on the bedside table, and her expression carried something Siwoo recognized with cold clarity. Contempt, dressed in composure, but contempt underneath. She said, sweetly, that she had come to see how Minseo was doing. Minseo said she was having a good morning. Suri walked in without being invited. She looked at the sketchbook over Minseo's shoulder and said it was interesting. Then she said, in the same light tone she might use to discuss the weather, that she had been thinking about the room. She said that once she and Siwoo settled into their proper routines after the wedding, the estate would need to be reorganized. There was an apartment in the guest wing that would give Minseo more privacy, more independence. She said independence in the way that people say independence when they mean distance. Minseo said she was comfortable where she was. Suri smiled. She said, of course. For now. She left the door open when she went. In the hidden room, Siwoo watched his sister sit very still for a long moment. Then Minseo put her headphones back on. But she did not draw. She just sat there with the pencil in her hand, staring at a blank page she did not fill. On the evening of the first day, Suri found Tessa alone in the corridor outside the supply room. She moved without hurry, wearing a belted Celine robe, her posture carrying the particular authority of a woman who has decided that a corridor is a place where she sets the terms. She closed the distance between them in the smooth, confident way of someone who expects the other person to step back. Tessa did not step back. Suri said she appreciated Tessa's commitment. She said she could genuinely see how much Tessa cared about Minseo. She said she just wanted to share something, woman to woman, before things got complicated. She said that by managing every detail of Minseo's day so completely, Tessa was reinforcing Minseo's sense of herself as a permanent patient rather than a young woman capable of managing her own life. She said this with a look of tender concern that was so well assembled, it would have convinced most people. She said that after the wedding she was going to be redesigning certain aspects of the household structure, and she wanted Tessa to understand that now, so there were no surprises. Tessa looked at her for a moment, then she said, I understand what you are saying. Suri said she was glad. She said she was sure they would work well together going forward. Tessa said, I understand that you are asking me to step back from Minseo's care. A pause. I am not going to do that. Suri blinked. Just once. The expression did not change, but something behind it did. The microsecond recalibration of a person who has encountered an obstacle she did not predict. She said, very quietly, that Siwoo trusted her judgment about the household. Tessa said, Siwoo hired me to keep his sister safe. That is what I am doing, and Siwoo has not told me himself to change anything. Suri looked at her with the specific expression of someone realizing a variable is more fixed than she planned. Then she said, with the smile she used when deciding someone was not worth further engagement, that she was sure Tessa would find her position here much simpler once things settled after the wedding. She walked away. She did not look back. Tessa watched her go. Then she went directly to the supply room and counted every bottle on the shelves. She wrote the count in her private notebook with the time and the date. She had done this because in 4 years of care work she had learned that the people who smile when they threaten you are the ones who bear the closest watching. In the hidden room, Siwoo watched that exchange with the focused attention of a man reading a clause that changes the entire meaning of a contract. He watched Tessa stand her ground. He watched her go immediately to document what she had observed. He thought about the interview notes. Mrs. Kim had read to him 4 months ago the line about ordinary Tuesdays building resilience for the crisis, and he thought that he had hired the right person for reasons he had not yet fully understood. Day 2 was when it became something far worse. Tessa Simone arrived at 6:45 every morning. Siwoo watched her come up the corridor on the hallway camera, a thermos in one hand and her small work bag in the other, moving with the quiet, purposeful energy of someone who takes their first hour seriously. She was 23 years old, from Silver Spring in Maryland, the daughter of a pediatric nurse and a high school music teacher, and she had come to Seoul 4 months ago through a specialist placement agency that matched trained medical companions with private households requiring long-term care. She had described herself in her interview as someone who believed the quality of care a person received on an ordinary Tuesday was more important than the quality of care they received on the day of a crisis, because the ordinary Tuesdays were what built the body's resilience for the crisis. Mrs. Kim, who had managed the Un estate for 11 years and was not easily moved by anything, read that line back to Siwoo from the interview notes with the particular flatness she used when something impressed her more than she wanted to admit. He had hired Tessa immediately. She was tall, brown-skinned, her natural hair tied back neatly for work, dressed with the practical elegance of someone who understood that presentation mattered without letting it outrank function. She had learned enough Korean in 4 months to greet Minseo properly each morning, to navigate the pharmacy nearby, and to have a slow but genuine conversation with Mrs. Kim about the weather and the price of persimmons, which Mrs. Kim considered among the highest compliments anyone could pay to an effort at language. He had passed Tessa in the hallways perhaps a dozen times. He had noticed, each time, that she gave people her full attention when they spoke to her. Not the performed full attention of someone waiting for their turn, the real kind, where the listening shows in the eyes. He watched her now knock on Minseo's door. She always knocked. She always waited for Minseo to answer before entering. He had never seen her push a door open without permission, and in his world, the people who respected small boundaries were the ones who could be trusted with large ones. Inside the room, Minseo's face when she saw Tessa was everything her face had not been the morning before when Suri walked in. She pulled the headphones down and was already halfway to a smile before she finished turning around. Tessa came in and set the thermos on the desk. She had made warm barley tea, Minseo's preference in the morning, something she had learned not from the care notes but from asking. She sat in the chair and said good morning in Korean, slightly mispronouncing it, and Minseo corrected her, and they both laughed at the correction. And the room filled with the ease of 2 people who have found their rhythm. Then the morning care routine, medication first. She knew every bottle by name and by time. She knew the joint supplement needed food, so she had brought rice crackers from the kitchen because Minseo rarely ate before medication and left to herself would forget. She knew which pill Minseo had most difficulty swallowing and that cold water helped more than room temperature. She knew, because she had learned by watching and asking and adjusting over 4 months every small particular of what Minseo needed and when. Siwoo watched from the hidden room with the attention of a man seeing something he had been too busy to fully notice. He had provided. He had paid for the best care. He had trusted the system he built. But watching Tessa sit beside his sister with the barley tea and the crackers, and the practiced knowledge of every detail, he understood for the first time the difference between care that is arranged and care that is given. They were not the same thing at all. Then Suri arrived. She came to Minseo's room at 10 o'clock, while Tessa had gone downstairs to retrieve the midday medication from the locked kitchen cabinet, a process that required Mrs. Kim's key and took roughly 8 minutes. 8 minutes. That was all Suri needed. She sat on the edge of Minseo's bed without asking and looked at the medication tray. Her eyes moved across the row of bottles and blister packs with an expression that was almost clinical. Then she said, very casually, that she had been reading about autoimmune conditions. She said she had seen research suggesting that long-term medication protocols could sometimes become counterproductive, that the body occasionally did better with periods of reduced intervention. She said she had a friend who had improved dramatically after questioning her treatment plan. Minseo said her doctor managed her protocol. Suri said, of course, doctors were wonderful. She just wondered if Minseo ever pushed back, whether she simply took whatever she was given without thinking about it for herself. She said it like encouragement. Like she was empowering Minseo toward self-advocacy. She said Siwoo worried so much about the medical side that sometimes she wondered if the people around Minseo made her feel more fragile than she actually was. Minseo said, carefully, that she was not fragile. She was sick. Those were different things. Suri smiled. She said yes, of course. She was just saying. Then she reached over and picked up the morning medication log. Tessa kept it in precise detail. Every dose, every time, every note about Minseo's response. Suri flipped through it with the casual ease of someone handling a document that belongs to them. She set it back at a slightly different angle and said it seemed like a great deal of medication for someone so young. She left before Tessa returned. She closed the door gently, like someone who had done nothing at all. In the hidden room, Siwoo had been gripping the arms of his chair so hard his knuckles had gone white. He made himself release his grip. He made himself breathe. He had just watched his fiancée sit beside his sick sister and suggest, in the smooth language of a woman who understood how to make poison sound like medicine, that Minseo's medication might be doing her harm. It was not a clumsy attack. It was surgical. She had not told Minseo to stop taking her medication. She had simply introduced doubt, a question, a seed. She had used the language of care to plant something designed to do the opposite of care, quietly, in 8 minutes, while the person whose job it was to protect Minseo was 1 floor away. Tessa came back 8 minutes later. She was already doing the arithmetic. Siwoo could see it in the shift of her posture the moment she stepped through the door, the slight forward tilt of someone who has registered that a room feels different from how they left it. She looked at Minseo. She looked at the medication log sitting at a different angle. She did not ask directly. She sat in the chair and said, easily, that Minseo looked like she was thinking hard about something. Minseo was quiet. Then she said she had a question about her medication. She said someone had mentioned that long-term protocols sometimes did more harm than good. Tessa went very still. Then she asked, quietly, who had mentioned that. Minseo did not answer. She just said she was wondering if it was true. Tessa looked at her for a long, steady moment. Then she said that Minseo's medication protocol had been designed by a specialist who had treated her condition for 3 years and reviewed it every 6 weeks. That the protocol was the primary reason Minseo had not been hospitalized in the last 14 months, despite 2 significant flare-ups. That stopping or reducing it without medical supervision would not give her body a rest. It would give her condition an opening. She said it gently, but completely, and she held Minseo's gaze the entire time, so there was no possibility of the words sliding past. Then she said that if anyone ever said something to Minseo about her medication that made her uncertain, she needed Minseo to tell her, because that uncertainty was dangerous, and she needed to know. Minseo looked at Tessa for a long moment. Then she said, quietly, "It was Suri." The room was completely still on the monitor. Tessa did not react the way most people would. She did not look alarmed. She did not say anything dramatic. She absorbed it with the stillness of someone whose first priority is the person in front of them and whose own feelings are secondary. She said, "Thank you for telling me." "I hear you." Then she said, "I need you to promise that whatever anyone tells you about your medication, you come to me or to Dr. Park before you change anything. Can you do that?" Minseo said yes. Tessa said good. She administered the medication, noted every detail in the log, and stayed beside Minseo for the next full hour. In the hidden room, Siwoo pulled out his phone and sent a message to his head of security. It said, "Activate full audio on the first floor guest rooms and the sitting room. I want everything recorded." The second day's evening brought something worse than anything that had happened in daylight. Suri had a routine Siwoo had not known about. After dinner, when the household staff retreated and the estate went quiet, she visited the medical supply room on the ground floor. A small, climate-controlled room where Minseo's backup medications were stored along with equipment and supplies. Mrs. Kim had a key. Tessa had a key. And there was a third key on a hook in the kitchen that any household member could access. Siwoo watched on the camera as Suri took that key at 9:09. She went to the supply room. She stayed inside for 4 minutes. She came out, replaced the key, and went back upstairs. He sat in the dark and thought about the word calculated. In his world, calculated was almost a compliment. He had built a company on calculation. He had respected the quality in adversaries even when they pointed it at him. He had thought of it as a sophisticated trait. What Suri had done to a 20-year-old girl in a hospital bed in her own home was also calculated. And sitting in the dark with 6 monitors and the weight of what he had just watched, he understood with permanent clarity that calculation aimed at a vulnerable person was not sophistication. It was predation. And the difference between them was not a matter of degree. It was a matter of everything. He called Mrs. Kim. She answered on the first ring. He told her, very quietly, to go to the supply room in the next 30 minutes and check the backup medication bottles on the second shelf from the top. He told her to photograph the labels and the caps, and to tell no one, and come to the East Wing afterward. Mrs. Kim asked 0 questions. She said yes with the voice of a woman who has been managing a family's most difficult moments for 11 years, and who knows what it means when the person she works for calls at this hour, with a request this specific. She had been watching the estate since Siwoo staged his departure. She had not known about the hidden room, but she had known something was happening, because she had worked for this family long enough to understand that Siwoo did not do anything without a reason. And the sudden Tokyo trip that required no packing and no car to the airport had a shape to it that she recognized. She had watched. She had said nothing to anyone. She had simply done her job with extra attention and waited for the moment when she would be needed. She went. 30 minutes later, she appeared at the hidden room door. She handed him her phone showing photographs and said, in a voice that was completely controlled and completely furious, underneath the control, that 2 of the bottles had been emptied and refilled. The factory seal indentations on the caps were wrong, pressed from the inside rather than by a factory press. Someone had opened them, poured out the contents, and replaced them with what appeared to be water. Siwoo sat with that information in silence. His fiancée had replaced his sister's emergency backup medication with water. He understood what it was. If Minseo had a serious flare-up and reached for the emergency medication, and it did not work, the window before medical help arrived would be longer. The confusion would be real. And Suri would be the one present. Suri would be the one who managed the crisis. Suri would be the one Siwoo came home to, composed and capable. And Minseo would be the one whose health had destabilized under a different caregiver's watch, building a case, piece by quiet piece, that something was wrong with the way Minseo was being managed. That perhaps the current arrangement needed to change, that perhaps a guest wing apartment and a reduced schedule was more appropriate than all this intensive care, that perhaps, over time, less was more. It was a play, patient and deeply dangerous. And it had been running inside a house where a 20-year-old girl trusted that the people around her were on her side. Before Siwoo had built his company, he had read his grandfather's private journals, written across 40 years of business in blunt, unadorned script. His grandfather had written that the most dangerous enemies are not the ones who come at you from the front. They are the ones who stand close enough to whisper. Siwoo had thought about that line many times in boardrooms. He had never thought he would need it at home. He sat in the dark for a long time after the camera footage ended, and he fully understood what he had seen. He thought about the Yoon family, about the merger documents in their third round of legal review, about the two family lawyers who had spent the last month building a structure that was supposed to make two great families stronger. He thought about every social event where he had stood beside Suri and watched people look at them together, with the expression of people looking at something that had been correctly assembled. He thought about every conversation in which she had said the right things about Minseo, had touched his arm when he spoke about his parents, had performed the warmth of someone who understood what mattered to him. He had been a man who prided himself on reading people, who had built his reputation on not being fooled, who had learned from his grandfather's journals and his own years of hard experience that the most dangerous people are not the ones who come at you from the front. He had been fooled, completely and for months, in the most important area of his life. He set that down. Not because it was comfortable to set down, but because he did not have the time to carry it right now. His sister was in the house. And the woman who had replaced her emergency medication with water was in the same house. He needed every one of those hours. Mrs. Kim replaced the bottles with proper medication from a sealed reserve. She kept separately, documented everything with photographs and written notes, and stood before Siwoo with the expression of a woman who had served this family for 11 years, and whose quiet fury could have powered the entire estate. She said, "Tell me what you need," he told her. She nodded. She went. The third day was when Suri went furthest. Tessa had gone to her own room after the late evening rounds. Minseo's light was off. The estate was quiet. At 11 o'clock at night, a shadow appeared on the corridor camera outside Minseo's room. Siwoo had spent 2 full days watching Suri move through the house, with the practiced ease of a woman who had assigned herself the role of mistress before the wedding made it official. He had watched her redirect the kitchen staff on preferences Siwoo had never shared with her. He had watched her walk Minseo's corridor at times that coincided with Tessa's absences with a precision that looked less and less like coincidence the more he observed it. He had held himself in place. He had told himself he needed the full picture before he moved. Then she came back at 11 o'clock at night. She was wearing silk pajamas, her hair loose, and she opened Minseo's door without knocking. Minseo woke up disoriented, pulled out of deep sleep. She reached for the lamp. Suri said, quietly, to leave it off. She said, she just wanted to talk. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, and she said she needed Minseo to understand something, woman to woman, honestly, without Siwoo in the middle of it. She said that Siwoo carried Minseo as a weight he was too devoted to set down himself, that this weight was why he worked the way he did, why he could not fully relax, why he struggled to be truly present in a relationship. She said that if Minseo truly loved her brother, she would find a way to need less from him, to be less central, to let him build his own life without feeling, every time he turned away, that he was abandoning her. She said all of this in the dark at 11 o'clock on the edge of a sick girl's bed, with no witnesses and no mercy, in the gentle, regretful voice of someone delivering a difficult truth as an act of love. Then she said goodnight. She stood. She left. She closed the door softly. In the hidden room, Siwoo sat completely still for a very long time. He was past fury. Fury was too hot for what he felt. What he felt was cold and absolute, the specific cold of someone who has removed all remaining uncertainty, and is deciding with complete clarity what comes next. He did not sleep. He sat with the screens until 5 in the morning, and at 6:45, Tessa appeared on the hallway camera, exactly as she did every morning, thermos in hand, moving with the quiet, purposeful energy of someone who had no idea what had happened 6 hours ago, and no idea that everything was about to break open. She knocked on Mincio's door. She waited. Mincio said, "Come in." Tessa stopped at the threshold. Mincio was already awake, sitting up with her knees to her chest, and her eyes carrying the quality of someone who had been thinking since long before morning. Tessa came in and sat in the chair. She did not immediately begin the routine. She looked at Mincio and said, simply, that she looked like she had not slept. Mincio said she had not. Tessa asked, "Why?" Mincio looked at the window. She looked at the wall full of drawings. She looked at the evidence of her own interior life, covering every inch of the space around her, her endless, stubborn imagination that illness could not reach. Then, she told Tessa what had happened at 11 o'clock. She told her everything, every word Suri had said in the dark. It came out in pieces. The knock, without warning. Suri sitting on the bed, asking her to leave the lamp off. The tone of someone delivering a difficult truth with practiced reluctance, as if the words cost her something. The logic that sounded almost kind in the dark, that Siwoo's devotion was a weight, that real love released people, that if Mincio cared about her brother, she would find a way to need him less. All of it delivered quietly, without witnesses, in the room where Mincio was most vulnerable, at the hour when vulnerability was most complete. Mincio said she had lain awake afterward and gone over every word. She said she had tried to find the place where it was wrong, and it had taken her until 3 in the morning to locate it. And what she found was not an argument or a counter-logic, but something simpler. She had thought about every single morning for the past 4 months, when Tessa had knocked on her door and waited for her to answer. She had thought about the barley tea and the crackers, and the Korean vocabulary cards, and the drawing she had given Tessa that now hung on the wall above Tessa's desk. She had tested the thought from every angle the way she tested everything, carefully, the way a person navigates a dark room by touch. She had thought about what it would mean if Suri was right. If Siwoo's devotion was a weight she was placing on him without knowing. The thought was designed to sound like concern, but it landed like a verdict, and the longer she sat with it, the more she understood that it was designed to feel that way, that the whole construction was designed to make her feel that the most loving thing she could do was shrink. She had been sick for 4 years. She knew her body in the specific, unglamorous way of someone who has had to learn it as a matter of survival. She knew what inflammation felt like from the inside. She knew the difference between a bad day and a warning sign. She knew when her joints were in the early stages of a flare before the markers showed in blood work. She had learned all of this because she had had to, because her body had required her to become an expert in it, just to stay functional. And she had done it without self-pity and without drama, because self-pity and drama cost energy, and energy was not something she had to spare. She was not fragile. She was not a burden. She was a person who was ill and who had a brother who loved her, and a caregiver who knocked on her door every morning and waited for the answer. That was what was true. And Suri, sitting in the dark at 11 o'clock, using the language of care to deliver the opposite of care, was not going to become what was true just because she said it in a kind voice. And she had understood, at 3 in the morning, that the woman sitting on her bed in the dark was describing a version of love that required her to become smaller. And that the woman who knocked on her door every morning and waited was demonstrating a version of love that required nothing of her at all, except to be there. Tessa sat and listened with the complete stillness of someone who has learned that this kind of listening, the kind that does not interrupt and does not flinch and does not redirect, is itself a form of protection. When Mincio finished, there was a long silence. Then Tessa said, clearly and without softening, that what she had just described was not honesty, it was not concern, it was not a woman trying to help her understand something difficult about love. What Suri had done was come to a 20-year-old girl in the dark and try to make her feel that her own existence was a burden on the person she loved most. She said that what Minseo's illness required of Siwoo was something Siwoo had chosen. He had chosen it when he was 22 years old and their mother asked him to, and he had chosen it again every single day since. That was not a weight, that was love. And love that is freely given does not become a burden because someone who wants the space tells you it is. Minseo began to cry. It was the kind of crying that had been held a very long time. Tessa sat beside her and did not try to fix it or rush it or redirect it. She sat with her hands folded and let Minseo cry until she was finished, and then she got her a glass of water and stayed beside her while the first light came through the curtains. There are moments in care work that the training does not prepare you for. Tessa had known this since her first year in Baltimore, had known it the way you know things you have been told but not yet experienced, theoretically, without weight. The weight came later. It came in the moments when the person you cared for looked at you with the exhaustion, not of a sick body, but of a person who has been carrying the effort of appearing okay for too long, and in that moment, cannot carry it anymore. Those moments required something that had no clinical name. They required you to be willing to simply be there, fully, without agenda, without the professional distance that was supposed to protect you from being affected. Tessa had stopped pretending that professional distance was available to her when it came to Minseo 3 months ago, and she had made her peace with that. Some people you cared for, some people you cared about. Those were different things, and the second was better. She thought about what she had observed over the past 3 days. She had not known the full shape of it. She had not known about the supply room, or about 11 o'clock at night. But she had known something was wrong, because she had been paying attention with the particular quality of attention that you could not manufacture, the kind that came from actually caring whether the thing you were watching went well or badly. She had watched Minseo's face in the mornings change over 3 days, growing more careful, more guarded, smaller. She had watched the medication log displaced and replaced at a different angle. She had stood in a corridor and been told clearly by a woman in a Celine robe that her position in this house was temporary and conditional. She had documented all of it. She had asked Mrs. Kim quiet questions. She had replaced what needed replacing without making Minseo afraid. She had done all of this while keeping the morning routine exactly as it was, the barley tea, and the crackers, and the Korean pronunciation, and the laughter, because Minseo's ordinary Tuesdays were the most important thing she had in her care, and she was not going to let anything interrupt them. That, she thought, was the job. That was the whole job. Everything else was detail. In the hidden room, Siwoo had watched all of it. He had heard every word Minseo said about 11 o'clock. He had watched Tessa sit there in the pale early light and hold the space for his sister's grief with such steady, undemanding presence that it broke something in him that had been sealed for a very long time. He picked up his phone. He called his driver. He said to bring the car to the East Wing entrance. Then he called Mrs. Kim and told her he was coming out and to arrange a dinner that evening. He told her who would be there. Mrs. Kim said, "Yes, sir." She said it with the quietness of someone who had been waiting for exactly this call. He sat for a few more minutes, looking at the screen where Tessa was helping his sister with her morning medication, with the same careful attention she brought to every single morning, regardless of who was watching. He thought about the private notebook in her uniform pocket, the one she had been filling with quiet observations for days, not because anyone asked her to, but because she was a person who documented what she saw and understood that what happened when no one was watching was the most important information there is. He stood up. He put on his jacket. He went home. The dining room was set with white linen and silver candlesticks and the good baccarat glasses. If you did not know what was coming, it would have looked like a celebration. Suri came down in a deep navy Valentino dress, her hair pinned perfectly, her composure radiating the ease of a woman who believed she had managed 3 difficult days well. She kissed Siwoo's cheek when he walked in. She said she had missed him. Her smile was so polished, it looked like something that had been applied, rather than felt. Jiyeon was there too, having stayed for a few days at Suri's invitation. She sat with the satisfied energy of a woman who expected only good things from this evening. Minseo sat at the table looking pale and very still. Tessa took her place near the door as she always did, ready to assist and ready to be invisible. Siwoo said, "Tessa, please sit with us tonight." Suri's smile did not waver, but something behind it did. Tessa said she was fine where she was. Siwoo said it was not a request. She pulled out the chair beside Minseo and sat down. The food was served. The first courses passed in conversation that Suri carried with comfortable authority. She spoke about social engagements she had handled in Siwoo's absence, a lunch for the charity committee, a call from her father's assistant regarding the merger timeline. She touched Siwoo's arm twice. She performed, as always, with tremendous skill. Between the courses there was conversation that Suri carried with comfortable authority. Minseo ate very little. She sat with her hands in her lap and kept her eyes mostly on her plate. If Suri noticed the quality of that silence, she gave no indication of it. Tessa sat beside her with the stillness of someone who had learned that staying very still was sometimes the most powerful thing available. Siwoo watched. He answered Suri's questions. He ate. He was a very patient man. He was also, by this point, finished being patient. He set down his fork. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed a small recording device on the table beside his plate, no larger than a thumb. He said it gently, without drama, the way you place a card on a table when you know your hand has already won. Suri looked at it, then she looked at Siwoo. 1 second. 2. The composure remained on the surface. But the thing behind it began to go out, the way a light goes out when the power is cut, not all at once but in the sequential way of a system, losing its source. He said, "I want to tell you about my trip to Tokyo." She said, "Of course." He said, "I did not go to Tokyo." The room went completely still. Even Jiyeon, who had been reaching for her wine glass, stopped. He said he had been in the estate for 3 days. He said everything he had seen and heard was documented and witnessed by people he trusted. He went methodically. The phone call with Jiyeon the first morning, he said, and he looked at Jiyeon as he said it, and Jiyeon went very pale. The conversation about the guest wing. The visit at 10 o'clock with the medication questions. The supply room at 9 in the evening. He paused at the supply room. He gave it its full weight. He said, "You replaced 2 bottles of my sister's emergency backup medication with water." Minseo made a sound. Something small and involuntary. The sound of someone hearing a thing confirmed that they had not known to fear. Tessa's hand crossed the table without hesitation and covered hers. Siwoo continued. He said he had watched Suri go to Minseo's room at 11 o'clock at night. He described what she had said, every word. He said it without raising his voice because he had never needed volume for the things that were already devastating by themselves. Suri sat with the stillness of someone whose options are collapsing around her in real time, and who is smart enough to know that any move will only accelerate the collapse. She looked at the recording device. She looked at Siwoo. She looked, briefly, at Tessa, with the particular expression of a person identifying the weak point and discovering it is no longer weak. Then, she looked at Minseo. And for the first time in this house, since the door had closed 3 days ago and she had set down the performance, something real moved across her face. Not guilt, exactly. Something more brittle. The look of a person confronted not just with what they did, but with who they were in the doing of it. Seen, fully and clearly, by someone who had not looked away. She stood. She picked up her bag. She said, with the only honest words she had spoken inside these walls, that she needed to leave. She walked through the dining room. Her heels crossed the foyer marble. The front door opened. It closed. Jiyeon did not move for a moment. She had been at every Yoon family event. She had listened to Suri's plans on the phone the first morning and laughed the satisfied laugh of someone who expected only good outcomes. She had come to this dinner expecting to sit at the table of a man who did not know what was being arranged around him. She looked at the recording device on the table. She looked at Siwoo. She looked at Mrs. Kim, who had appeared in the doorway and was standing with the still, witnessing presence of a woman who has seen the moment justice arrives and finds it exactly on time. Then Ji-yeon looked at Min-seo, who was sitting across the table with Tessa's hand over hers and her eyes very clear and very steady. Ji-yeon looked away first. Ji-yeon, left alone at the table, looked at her own hands for a long moment. Then she excused herself and was driven away in a car. Siwoo arranged for her without any discussion. The candles burned between Siwoo, Min-seo, and Tessa. Min-seo said, in a voice steadier than it had any right to be, "How long have you known?" He said, "Long enough." She said, "Why did you not tell me sooner?" He said, "Because I needed to be certain, and I needed you to be safe while I was." He looked at Tessa when he said the second part. "She has been safe." He said, "I know, because of you." Tessa shook her head the way she did when deflecting credit. He did not let her. He said, "I watched you for 4 days from a room in this house you did not know existed. I watched you notice things no one asked you to notice, and protect things no one told you were in danger. I watched you sit with my sister at 5 in the morning because she needed someone, and you were there, and you stayed." He paused. "I want to say that out loud and clearly, so there is no ambiguity about what I am telling you." She was very still. He said, "What you did here mattered more than I know how to properly say." Min-seo looked at Tessa with an expression between gratitude and a kind of grief at understanding exactly how close a thing it had been. She said, "She replaced your backup medication with water. You knew." Tessa said, "Mrs. Kim told me the morning after it happened." Min-seo stared at her. "You knew, and said nothing to me." Tessa said, "I told you enough. I told you to come to me before you changed anything. I needed you to trust me and keep your routine without being frightened. Because fear raises cortisol, and cortisol triggers the inflammatory response, and your immune system did not need that additional pressure on top of everything else." There was a silence. Then Min-seo said, in a voice that was entirely incredulous, "You were protecting my immune system from the stress of knowing, while managing a crisis, in real time." Tessa said, "That is my job." Min-seo said, "That is not just your job." She said it, with the certainty of someone who has understood something they will not forget. That night, after the table was cleared and the candles burned low, Siwoo sat with Min-seo in the sitting room, without anything required of either of them. Just the two of them on the sofa, with the lamp on low, Min-seo holding her sketchbook, not drawing, just holding it. She said after a while, "I almost stopped taking my medication." He did not move. He said, "I know." She said, "She made it sound so reasonable. That is what I cannot stop thinking about. Appa, I know my illness. I know what my medication does, and she almost convinced me." She paused. "That frightens me more than anything else." He said, "It should not frighten you. It means she was skilled at what she was doing. It does not mean you were weak. You were being deliberately targeted by someone who had studied exactly how to reach you. That is not the same thing as weakness." Min-seo was quiet. She looked at the sketchbook in her lap. She said, "Tessa knew something was wrong before she had any proof. She just knew, from watching and paying attention. And she protected me without telling me she was protecting me, because she knew the fear would make me sicker." Min-seo looked at the window. Then she said, "I want to draw her. I have been wanting to for weeks. I keep thinking about what I would draw." She paused. "I think I would draw someone standing in a corridor in the dark, with their hands folded, not doing anything dramatic, just being there." Siwoo looked at his sister. He said, "Draw it." She nodded. She opened the sketchbook. She picked up a pencil. And in the quiet of the sitting room, with the lamp low and Seoul outside the window, Min-seo began. A few days after the dinner, Siwoo found Min-seo in the garden for the first time in weeks. It was a cold afternoon in late autumn, and she was bundled in a heavy, oversized coat, sitting in her wheelchair near the stone bench where the cherry trees stood bare and patient. And she had a sketchbook in her lap, but she was not drawing. She was just sitting, looking at the trees. He went out and sat on the bench beside her. He did not ask what she was thinking because she would tell him when she was ready or she would not. And either way was fine. She said, after a while, "Do you remember the night I cried? When you came home late and I said it was nothing?" He said he remembered. She said, "I had asked her to stop coming to my room alone. I said I preferred company when I had visitors. I said it very politely." She paused. She looked at me for a moment, and then she smiled and said she completely understood. She came back the next night anyway. He looked at his sister. He said, "Why did you not tell me?" She looked at the trees. She said, "Because she had not done anything I could point to. She had not said anything cruel. She had not threatened me. She had just said things that sounded almost right and made me feel a little smaller each time, and I could not figure out how to explain that without sounding like I was making something out of nothing." She paused. "I thought maybe it was me. I thought maybe I was being difficult." He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "You were not being difficult." She said, "I know that now." He said, "You have never been difficult." She looked at him sideways and almost smiled. She said, "I am sometimes difficult." He said, "You are never difficult in ways that matter." She looked back at the trees. After a while, she said, "I am glad you built the room." He said, "So am I." They sat together in the cold until the light started to go, and neither of them felt the need to say much more than that. The weeks that followed were quiet in the particular way of spaces from which something harmful has been removed. The estate did not announce its relief. It simply settled. The light moved through the rooms differently. Mrs. Kim ran the household, without the invisible alert state of a loyal person, watching for danger they could not yet name. Siwoo handled the Yoon family matter quietly, and with the full weight of everything he had documented. The merger was restructured as a standard business partnership. No wedding. No announcement beyond a brief statement about the engagement ending by mutual agreement, which anyone paying attention understood was a legal courtesy and not a description of reality. The medication tampering was addressed through legal channels that Suri would spend several years navigating through consequences. He did not make it public. He made it sufficient. Minseo's health stabilized. Dr. Park noted at her next appointment that her inflammatory markers had dropped measurably. He said she seemed less stressed. She told him, with the dry humor she deployed when feeling genuinely well, that her stress levels had undergone a significant structural change recently. He said to keep doing whatever she was doing. He redesigned Minseo's care arrangements and made them more robust. A second companion was added for overnight shifts. Dr. Park came twice weekly. The supply room received a proper security system. None of this changed what Tessa did or how she did it. She kept arriving at 6:45. She kept the notebook. She kept learning Korean at a pace that continued to impress Mrs. Kim. 2 weeks after the dinner, Minseo finished the drawing she had described that night in the sitting room. She called Tessa in to see it. It was exactly what she had said it would be, a figure in a corridor, in pencil-dark textures, standing in what was clearly the dark, because the rest of the space around her was deep gray. There was a sliver of light under a door at the end of the corridor. The figure was facing it, not moving toward it, just there, facing it, present. Minseo had written along the bottom, in her careful, ornate handwriting, a single line. Sometimes, the most important thing a person can do is simply not leave. Tessa looked at it for a long time. Then, she said it was the best drawing she had ever seen. Minseo said she was biased. Tessa said she was not biased. She said she was accurate. She sat on the edge of the chair and looked at the drawing one more time. She looked at the figure in the corridor, the sliver of light under the door at the end, the handwriting along the bottom. She thought about the morning she arrived in Seoul for the first time, disoriented and jet-lagged and deeply uncertain whether what she had done, leaving a job she was good at and a country she knew for a contract on the other side of the world, was brave or simply impulsive. She had stood in the International Arrivals Hall at Incheon Airport with her bags and her printed directions and her carefully prepared Korean greeting, and she had thought about her mother, who had worked night shifts without complaint for 20 years, because the nighttime babies needed someone calm and steady, and she was constitutionally calm and steady at night, even when she was not. She had thought, I come from people who show up. I will show up. Her mother had done night shifts for over 2 decades because the babies needed someone calm and steady, and she was that person, even when she was exhausted, even when the shifts ran long, even when the work was invisible to everyone who was not the child on the receiving end of it. Her father had found students with buried talent and believed in them before they believed in themselves, had stayed after hours and come in early and done all of it without expecting recognition, because the recognition was not the point. The point was the student learning to believe in themselves. Tessa had been raised by 2 people who understood at a cellular level that showing up when it was hard was the only showing up that mattered. She had not fully understood what she had been given until she was old enough to see what people without it looked like. She had not known, standing in that arrivals hall, what she was showing up for. She knew now. She asked if she could have it. Minseo said she had already planned to give it to her. She said she had been planning it since she started drawing it. Tessa took it carefully in both hands. She went to her room and took down the drawing she already had on the wall above her desk, the one Minseo had given her months ago, and she put the new one up in its place. Then she put the old one up beside it. She stood in her room looking at both of them and thought about the specific and unlikely shape of how she had arrived here, in a house in Seoul, in a life that had turned out to contain more than she had originally allowed herself to expect. It was, she thought, considerably more than enough. It was, in every way that mattered, exactly right. One evening in late November, Siwoo came home from the office and heard music through Minseo's door. 2 voices, call and response, working through sheet music, 1 note at a time. Tessa's father had taught high school music, and she had grown up reading notation, and she was teaching Minseo to read it too, turning it into something visual, the way Minseo turned everything into something she could see and hold. He stood in the corridor and listened to his sister, learned something new. He thought about his mother. He had spent 8 years building the structure of his promise, the resources and care plans and specialist team, the entire architecture of devotion. He had done all of it correctly. But standing in that corridor, he understood something his mother had probably known when she asked him and hoped he would eventually discover for himself. The structure kept Minseo alive. What made the living worth having was the people inside the structure, the ones who showed up with barley tea and private notebooks, and the specific courage to stand between a sick girl and the thing moving toward her and not move. He thought about the hidden room. He had built it for exactly this kind of situation. He had used it as he had designed it, watched and waited, and gathered everything he needed before he moved. It was the method that had built the company, and it was the method that had protected his sister. But the thing he could not have built into that method, the thing that no system could have delivered, was Tessa Simone, arriving at 6:45 every morning, with barley tea and crackers and a private notebook, and 4 months of paid attention. He had hired her. He had done the correct things. But the person who had actually stood between Minseo and the thing moving toward her had not been a system. It had been a 23-year-old woman from Maryland who believed that how you treated someone on an ordinary Tuesday was more important than how you treated them on the day of the crisis. She had been right about that. She was right about most things. He knocked on Minseo's door. Tessa's voice said, "Come in." He opened the door. Minseo was sitting up in bed with the sheet music in her lap, concentrated and pleased and entirely herself. Tessa was in the chair with a pencil, marking something. He said he had heard the music from the corridor. Minseo said she was learning to read it. She said, If she was going to draw what music felt like, she should know what it actually said. He said that made sense. She looked at him for a moment. She said, "You look different." He said, "Different how?" She said, "Less like. You are waiting for something to go wrong." He considered that. He said, she might be right. She said she was right. She said it the way she said things. She was certain of, without raising her voice. Then she looked at Tessa and back at him and back at Tessa with the expression of a younger sister who has observed more than she is supposed to and has decided to use it. Tessa did not look up from the sheet music, but the corner of her mouth moved. Siwoo looked at the ceiling briefly and then said, "Good night, Mincio." She said, "Good night, Appa." She said it with great satisfaction. He said good night to Tessa, who said good night in return, in a tone that was carefully composed, and told him absolutely nothing, which he had learned was itself a form of communication from her. He went out into the corridor. The estate was warm around him, the particular warmth of a house occupied by people who care for it and each other. Through the door behind him, the music started again, Mincio's voice and then Tessa's, one note at a time, a small and patient beginning. He walked toward his study thinking about something Mincio had said on the night of the dinner, sitting in the sitting room with her sketchbook held in her lap, not yet drawing. She had said, Tessa knew something was wrong before she had any proof. She just knew, from watching and paying attention. He had thought about that sentence many times since. He had built a company on the principle that watching carefully was the highest available form of intelligence. He had built a hidden room on that principle. He had staged a Tokyo departure and spent 3 days in the dark on that principle. And what he had found was not that his system had protected his sister. What he had found was that a 23-year-old woman from Maryland, with a private notebook and a thermos of barley tea, had protected his sister, had been protecting her for weeks before he ever stepped into that room, because she was paying attention in the particular way that only people who genuinely care are capable of paying attention. The system had hired her. Everything else she had done herself. He was 30 years old and he ran a company worth $3 billion, and he was still learning things that mattered. He thought about Minceo saying, "Sometimes the most important thing a person can do is simply not leave." She had written it as a caption for a drawing of a person standing in the dark. He had been the one in the dark room, watching the screens, managing the system, gathering the evidence. But the person in the drawing was not him. It was Tessa. Standing in the corridor at 5 a.m. with her hands folded, facing the door with the light under it, not going in yet, not leaving, just being there, present, ready. That was the drawing. That was what his sister had seen clearly enough to put on paper. He had built the room, he had run the operation, he had gathered the evidence and executed the confrontation and protected his sister with the method he had spent his adult life perfecting. All of that was true, and all of that had been necessary. But Tessa Simone had been in that house long before he opened the monitors. She had been paying attention before he gave anyone permission to pay attention. She had stood in a corridor and told a woman in a Celine robe that she was not going to step back. She had sat at 5 a.m. and held the space for a 20-year-old girl's grief, without agenda, without hurry, without anything except the specific and irreplaceable quality of a person who has decided that this person's well-being matters, and that decision is not conditional on whether anyone is watching. He would spend some time figuring out how to tell her that properly. He suspected it would take a while, and he did not mind. He left the door open so the music could come in. And it did. If this story held you from the first second to this one, please take a moment right now and hit that like button. Share this with someone you thought of while you were watching. Someone who needs to be reminded that the people who protect quietly, without an audience, without anyone watching, are often the most important people in any room. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because there are more stories coming that will reach into your chest and hold something there. We read every single comment and we want to know, which moment got you? Was it the medication bottles? Was it Suri in the dark at 11 o'clock? Was it Tessa saying she was protecting Mincio's immune system from the stress of knowing? Or was it Mincio telling her brother he looked less like he was waiting for something to go wrong? Tell us below. We are listening. Take care of each other, and we will see you in the next one.